Welcome to Politics Done Right. I am your host, Egberto Willies. This is a progressive program that will take the mystery out of politics. This is the program that will encourage you to make sure government becomes we the people. Whether you are liberal, progressive, conservative, or otherwise, you get to air your point of view. We are an independent media outlet that, unlike mainstream media beholden to corporations, we only owe allegiance to you. Remember, you can also send me a tweet at EGBERTOWILLIES. That is at Egberto Willies. Let us engage. It is Politics Done Right. Welcome to one more edition of Politics Done Right on KPFT. My name is Egberto Willies, your host. Folks, we have to remember, we are still in a pandemic, so things are working a little bit differently, but we get things done. We all make it through. Yes, Houston is going through its issues. Yes, Houston metropolitan area is going through its issues. Yes, Harris County is going through its issues. The state of Texas is going through the issues. The entire country is going through its issues. But also the world is going through the issues with this pandemic. But we will get through like we have always gotten through when bad things happen. Folks, please do remember that KPFT, however, still needs your support. We're still here bringing you new programming, making sure to keep you aware of what is going on in this world. Please call 713-526-5738. Again, that number is 713-526-5738. And be sure to contribute to KPFT on behalf, to Politics Done Right on behalf of KPFT. We need your support. We need to keep those doors open. We need to make sure the place continues to be sanitized so that we can continue to have those engineers who are making sure things continue. 713-526-5738. My dear brothers and my dear sisters, we have a great show for you today. We're going to start with Diana Martinez, who is running for Precinct 3. In Precinct 3. She is running in Precinct 3, so she's going to tell us a little bit about herself and what she wants to do. Secondly, I want to let you hear pieces near the end of Rayshard Brooks' ordeal before he was murdered by cop. You need to hear how this stuff escalated, how this cop simply did it all wrong. Later on, we're going to have a black pastor who attempting to stop those people dumping on his property. Two white guys dumping stuff on his properties. When he told them they couldn't, they went and they got 3 other members, so 5 family members surrounding him. He calls 911 as he takes out his concealed weapon to protect himself, just to keep them off until the cops got there. Cops got there, and what did they do? They arrested him. Well, eventually, you'll hear the story that we have coming subsequently. And lastly, we have Tim Wise. Tim Wise is one of the most prominent anti-racist lecturers and activists here in this country. So we have a great show for you. Stay tuned and let's get busy. Welcome to one more edition of Politics Done Right. As you guys know, we do both local, state, and national. Right now, we are with the next county commissioner from Precinct 3. When I make these predictions, it usually works out. Diana Martinez, how are you doing today?
I'm good. How are you?
I am doing great. Look, I've been wanting to talk to you and bring you on for some time now because, all I keep hearing is about Diana. Diana is going to change the paradigm. It's no longer going to be the good old boy network. We are going, just like we got Lina Hidalgo in there, we are now going to get Diana Martinez in there. So Diana, tell me a little bit about yourself.
Sure. So I'm a veteran educator, a mom and a wife, and longtime resident of Houston. And I thought that voting was enough. But apparently in November 2016, I got a rough lesson and started stepping up to do more. So I got activated got involved in different organizations like Indivisible Houston, Pantsuit Republic Houston, Pantsuit Republic State at the leadership level, and decided that with my organization skills and experience, it was time to step it up to the next level, and I can be the next county commissioner to make a real change for Precinct 3.
Now, let me tell you something, Deanna, because the truth of the matter is, I am a fanatic for teachers, okay? I've written so many articles stating that teachers are one of the most underpaid profession, yet the very most important profession in society, bar none, the ones that move knowledge forward. So anytime I hear that a teacher tells me they are wanting to get into a political office, I know things are going to be well done. So right now, Steve Radek is decided that he no longer is going to occupy that chair. I don't know if he was going to win it anyway. Now tell me, why are you more suited for the position than your current competitor?
So yes, we do have the runoff in July, July 14th. And, I've been asked, like, well, if you're running, why aren't you running for school board or something more connected to education? But the fact is that teachers and educators are so used to measuring data, making long-term and short-term plans, assessing things very quickly, being flexible, being responsive. And those are the skills that I can bring to the table, as well as empathy, communication. And the fact is that policies affect people. And if you don't have people in those seats that are going to represent the needs of working families in Precinct 3, then it's just going to be more of the same. And so we have a real opportunity now that Steve Radek is no longer running for that seat, to have somebody who's really going to fight to make a difference for those families.
Now, tell me a little bit about your precinct. What makes you similarly matched with that precinct?
Sure. So Precinct 3 is increasingly diverse, and a lot of Democratic candidates that maybe didn't have a chance before to win elections have won elections, like Lizzie, and Beto had a strong showing in Precinct 3. Andrea Duhan had a strong showing in Precinct 3, and so the pendulum is swinging to more progressive candidates. Mike Siegel is out there. He has a strong chance to win in his election. And so we're making inroads in listening to what people need. People want something different. They want to have access to services. They're really concerned about flooding and infrastructure and climate change. And so those are things that are important to everyone. So we can serve the people of Precinct 3 while making sure that we look at gaps in gaps to access and barriers to resources for those people who have been left behind. So you can do all of that at once.
Now, what's the most important need in Precinct 3? I mean, I know there are certain precincts that get quite a bit, and Radek was pretty good at getting stuff for his precinct. What do you think is necessary in your precinct to help those who have, in your own parlance, left behind in receiving what they deserved from the particular district, particular precinct?
Well, I'll give you two examples. We have some Head Start centers that are funded by Baker Ripley. We don't have a lot of county resources as far as Head Starts. There's one in Spring Branch, but other than that, there's none on the north or west sides of town, and that's an area that's growing, and people could access those resources for their children. In addition, we need to have equal distribution of clinics in Precinct 3. Our population is growing, and I know we have the constraints of the budget limitations by the state and Texas legislature, but we have some ability to make sure that we're being very cautious and strategic with our funds to make sure they're going towards people.
Now, what do you expect your working relationship with Lina Hidalgo, councilman, or rather, what's his name? Rodney Ellis and Garcia.
So they have been working on some fabulous policy that affect people. Just today, they are discussing how to make reforms in law enforcement and at the county level, and that's
Right.
critical. So I've been watching how Judge Hidalgo has been making decisions with using data, using science, and relying on experts to make sure that she's ensuring the public health. That's critical. And also, when we're approaching things like evictions, and we're approaching other bail reform measures, and things that affect, the entirety of the county, they are on the right track. So I'm really happy with the trajectory of the Commissioners Court, and I hope to join them and continue that work, and also dig into the area of a climate crisis plan for the county. There is no other county in Texas that has a climate crisis plan. Other counties in the nation do, and so we can be the first one. We can be a leader.
Explain, what does that really mean? Climate crisis, yeah.
Yes. So you know how Houston has a climate plan. So we could have one at the county level to encourage businesses to use more green strategies, to focus transportation policy, to work on our infrastructure as a county with our buildings and vehicles to make sure that we're using the most ecologically sound practices possible. So if we do that, then we can access our academic resources like Kinder and other universities nearby to get their resources and information and research to build a plan that makes sense for us. We have been victims in this. Basically every time it storms, or since we're in hurricane season, we all get paralyzed with fear. So it's a form of PTSD that I think we have collectively. But if we move forward with some sort of solution, then we can frame things in a positive way and not be victims anymore. We can be leaders.
Now, we're currently in a pandemic. The truth of the matter is there's very little that we know as far as how we're going to get out of this thing. Mm-hmm. I sit down and I do the numbers. I just don't know what we are going to do. Right now, as it turns out, the county is likely going to have quite a bit less money to work with. There's a good possibility that because of what I think is an impending big turn down, possibly a depression, that our values, our real estate values are going to be depressed, or tax base is going to be depressed. And above, we'll have more costs with sick people. Mm-hmm. How are we possibly going to handle that? And are these things that you've already given thought to, so that you can bring a fresh thought process to the chamber?
So whatever decisions that we make have to be people-centered. We have to realize that these decisions hold weight, and people have value, and we can't just be dismissive about some sort of item because we can't understand the value. So it looks like taking other people's views into perspective and really trying to base it on what's the moral thing to do, but also just trying to choose the best path. Maybe when you don't have a good choice, try to choose the best choice out of what we have available. So that takes a lot of tough decision making, but it means that you have to rely on the people who are advising you, and make sure that you have good people next to you to give you the best information in which to make that decision. So it's not a singular job, it's a team effort, and it means that you have to consult and talk to stakeholders and really be listening to what their concerns are, so you can move forward with the best choice.
Deanna, I'm going to tell you something. The answer that is such a prescient answer, beautiful answer. I interview a whole lot of people, and I asked a guy, I don't remember what he was running for. I asked him, what are you going to do? How are you going to solve this particular problem? And he looked at me and he said, I don't know, but we have to see how it's going to affect the business community. I asked you a similar question, and your first thing is whatever we do has to be people-centric. Mm-hmm. Unfortunately, most politicians do not think, in as much as they preach it, think people-centric first. It's all about how it affects business, how it affects the bottom line. So I think it is great to have somebody that is running. I'm not going to call you a politician. I'm going to call you a teacher that's running. I think it is great that is first and foremost what you think of. Now, please, what haven't I asked you that you would like to put out there?
Well, I know that my experience looks different, but the thing is that we need to have different voices at the table, and I'm really excited about this opportunity. People believe in what we've been talking about, believe in our platform, and they believe in this campaign, and that's been evident with the response we got in the primary. I was just hoping to make it into the runoff, and then I ended up being the leader in the election. And so I really hope to continue that momentum, reaching out to different people in the community so they know that I'm here. I give nightly updates at 8 p.m. on my Facebook page every night to talk about different items, concerns. I've had special guests like therapists and somebody from the food bank, because this is all important information. And when people have information, they're less scared. That's what we need right now.
Different perspective is important. The same perspective leads you into oblivion. How can people help your campaign? How can people find a way to donate to you? I mean, we want to make sure that grassroots campaigns are funded. How can they help you?
So they can visit DianaAlexander2020.com, and there's a place to donate there, and also to connect to get emails and information. We are outreaching to voters right now, and if they're interested in helping, there's an option to sign up for volunteering.
And when is your election, Deanna?
It is July 14th. Early voting starts June 29th, and it lasts till July 10th. So it's coming up pretty soon.
Excellent. Well, Deanna Martinez, thank you so kindly for, I better stop. How do you appear on the ballot? What's the name on the ballot?
Diana Martinez Alexander is how I'm on the ballot.
Diana Martinez Alexander, thank you so kindly for having been with Politics Done Right. You have a wonderful rest of your day.
I appreciate it. Thanks so much for having me on.
I can just go home. I have my daughters there right now. My daughter's birthday was yesterday.
All right. Hold on, Mr. Brooks. Will you take a preliminary breath test for me? It's yes or no.
I don't want to refuse anything.
It's yes or no. It's completely up to you.
Yes, I will.
Okay. Just wait here while I grab.
What kind of drinks did you have?
I'm not sure. It's something she ordered. She said top shelf or whatever.
Top shelf what?
I'm not sure. It was, like I said, it was her birthday, and
You had about 1.5 drinks, but you don't remember what kind of drinks they were?
no, sir.
All right.
I really don't, Mr. Ross.
All right. I think you've had too much to drink to be driving, so put your hands behind your back for me. Here, put your hands behind your back.
Hey, stop fighting. Stop fighting. Stop fighting. You're gonna get tased. You're gonna get tased. You're gonna get tased. Stop.
Come on, man.
Stop. You're gonna get tased.
Mr. Ross.
Hey, hands off the taser.
Stop.
Hands
Stop
off
fighting.
the taser.
Stop fighting.
Hands off the taser. Stop fighting.
Jesus.
63.
I just got through watching the body cam video of the officer as he interrogated Richard Brooks. Now, what was quite obvious in that interview is that both sides, both the officers and Rayshard Brooks, they were very civil in their conversation. But it was clear from the beginning that the officers were trying some sort of entrapment in the way they spoke to him, in the way they wanted him to say that, yes, I am drunk, I shouldn't be driving the vehicle. Look, this guy was at 1.08, I believe is the number, which is a tad bit above the level that calls you drunk. I think more than anything else, this guy was tired as hell, and then the alcohol made it that much more. It's dangerous. He shouldn't be behind the wheel. Let's go ahead and play the video of the press conference today. I cut it up in pieces, and then I'll take it on the other side.
And now there's a question of, was it reckless, or should he have used that force? Let me tell you and show you why shooting in a crowded parking lot is so reckless and so unnecessary of what he did. A witness today sent us his vehicle, which was hit by one of Officer Rowe's bullets while he and his kids were in the car. A couple feet up, and we would have had another loss of life. So trying to justify the actions of shooting at Mr. Brooks as he's running away in a crowded Wendy's parking lot when you could easily catch him later for what started off as a very non-confrontational situation. And people ask, how could this have ended? Why did he resist? Why it could have ended there? Well, it also could have ended here. I can walk. My sister's house is right here. That's how this could have ended. It didn't have to go to that level, and that's what we're saying in America with policing, is this type of empathy is gone. The courtesy of an officer, it wasn't like he was called there because Mr. Brooks had been swerving and was a danger to society. The first call was because a man was asleep. Where is the empathy in just letting him walk home? That's what policing is supposed to be, no matter what color you are. But as they said, that's broken, that's gone. We don't see that often, and we definitely don't see it in the African-American community. So just like the protests before, that's what we're demanding. It's not just laws and policy changes, but a mental change in policing, which is missing. We're looking forward to the DA's findings in this situation, and the only thing that we can ask for is some semblance of an idea of justice, because there is no definition anymore of what it is. But what we know right now is that a man's life was taken when it should never have happened. If people are asking, well, why would he resist when they were trying to put him in handcuffs? Well, they put George Floyd in handcuffs, and he was subsequently killed. So just getting put in handcuffs, if you're African American, doesn't mean, oh, you're going to get nicely taken to the back of a police car. So, especially watching this video of George Floyd over and over again, his reaction may have been, I'm not getting put in handcuffs. So we can't just toss it out because he resisted.
This is something that is not new. It's not just with this George Floyd. All of us, I know every black man standing behind me, and woman too, we have all been dealing with this from birth. So that's a trauma that is deep. It's not something that just started 2 months ago. I still today dress like I dress, doing what I do. I still feel nervous around police, and that shouldn't be the case. If you feel that way and then you see all of these things happening, of course you're going to feel some kind of way when the police come up to you and you're not in the perfect state of mind at that point in time.
And if you are black, the first thing you think is, what is going to be the outcome from that? Myself, that is exactly how I feel as well. Let's talk about de-escalation. They could have allowed this guy to go ahead and walk to his sister's home and kind of make sure they spent 40-something minutes with him or so. Let him walk. Give him a drive home. They do it. You know, I'm here in Kingwood, a friend of mine, at a McDonald's. A drunk 18-year-old rammed his car. The police and everybody's over there. The police officer walks over to him and say, could you not file a report and just kind of take care of this? His father will take care of this because, you know, he's just starting and it'll affect his college career. These things are done. I live in a mostly white community where there's a park behind here, and they catch the kids with the kegs of beers all the time. They let it go, tell them to go home. This wasn't a friend. Goes ahead, wrecked the car and left the scene of the wrecked car, and then came back walking. They didn't even attempt to arrest the person here in my neighborhood for leaving the scene of an accident or anything like that. Policing. And, you know, I'm not saying the police shouldn't do what they're doing in my community and in other communities. I'm saying that should be done in all communities. But whenever they are in these minority communities, they are going in there to hunt. They're going in there to hunt. Most of them don't live in these communities, and they see these people in these communities as others. And whenever there is a call, we are there to hunt. And when we go to hunt, we either leave with a dead person or somebody in shackles. That is how they see these communities. And until we change that mentality, when folks talk about defunding the police, it's not about, eliminating the police. It's about changing the entire paradigm of how policing is supposed to occur to ensure that people's rights are maintained, to ensure that policing does exactly what it is supposed to do, and that is policing and keeping us safe. Many like to tell black people, you are overreacting. This stuff about police officers or your enemies or your police officers treat you differently. That is just in your mind. That is just you race baiting, all these kinds of things, right? And we constantly say, no, no, no. In fact, personally, I called the police for nothing. And most people try to call the police for nothing unless it is something violent that they can't get out of, that somehow for sure the police is going to come and do the right thing. Well, this is what this black pastor did in Virginia. Now, he owns a property and he's on his property. Two white guys come. They're dragging a refrigerator to his dumpster on the property that he owns. And when he told them, you can't do that, this is my property, they leave, they go and they get 3 other people. So 5 people surround him, and he has a concealed license so he can carry a gun. He takes out his gun to protect himself as they're calling him by names and calling him racial epithets, and they don't care about Black Lives Matter. He holds them off with his gun as he calls 911. 911 comes out. The sheriffs comes out. You know what they do? They didn't touch the guys shouting all the racial epithets. They arrested the black pastor for brandishing a weapon that he can legally carry. And as he is taken away in the car, they're saying bye-bye to him. Well, of course, after the whole story comes out, the sheriff puts a video on the website and supposedly put 2 of the officers on paid leave. But what I'm trying to explain here is these are the indignities that even as we smile, even as we go through life as if we're just existing, we know the pitfalls. We understand what the country is all about. We understand how these things happen. Now, this pastor did everything right again, and here it is. He was the one arrested. I started to think, and I said, well, you know what? Maybe the arrest was a good thing, because you could have been shot dead by the guys who you're calling for help.
I'm here with Tim Wise. Tim Wise is among the most prominent anti-racist writers and educators in the United States, spending 25 years speaking to audiences in all 50 states and over 1,000 colleges and high school campuses, at hundreds of professionals of academic conferences and to community groups across the country. Wise is the author of 7 books, including his latest, Under the Influence, Shaming the Poor, Praising the Rich, and Sacrificing the Future of America. You'll see that in the links for you to check that out as well. Wise has been featured in several documentaries, including the 2013 Media Education Foundation release, White Like Me, Race, Racism, and White Privilege in America. The film, which he co-wrote and co-produced, has been called a phenomenal educational tool in the struggle against racism, and one of the best films made on the unfinished quest for racial justice. Wise appears regularly on CNN and MSNBC. Senor Wise, welcome aboard Politics Done Right. How are you doing today?
I'm doing great. Thanks for having me.
Absolutely. So first of all, I want to start right in the meat of things. When you heard about what I call the assassination in Minneapolis, what were your thoughts?
Well, I thought it was obviously just a horrific video and a horrific incident. And I also realized, as was the case with the video in Georgia of Arbery, that were it not for the video, were it not for the fact that we're in an era where that kind of stuff can actually be captured by someone's cell phone, that none of us would know anything about it, and that it would have been covered up and papered over. So that was the first thought. The second thought, which I found really incredibly disturbing, but I've had it before, was contrasting the relative lack of outrage by white Americans, obviously with some exceptions, but the general lack of outrage on the part of white Americans relative to the outrage that white Americans have been expressing over having to wear a mask in Costco, or having to stand 6 feet away from someone when they go into Trader Joe's, or having to maybe stay inside because there's a global pandemic and you don't want to kill anyone or die yourself. Like the idea that tyranny is taking over, which is what a lot of these white folks at these state capitals seem to believe because of these social distancing requirements. But when a black man is killed by an agent of the state, by 4 agents of the state, the other 3 standing around watching it happen and doing nothing, that's real tyranny, that's real oppression, and they say nothing at all. And so I just find it fascinating to look at the contrast between the things that white Americans protest, by and large, and the things which we don't. And obviously, there have been some fantastic, white folks who have joined in solidarity in Minneapolis and around the country and are fed up with this stuff too. So I don't want to suggest that there aren't some white allies out there doing the work. It's just obvious to me that by and large, white America is on a very different wavelength in terms of what constitutes oppression. And that's something that concerns me greatly.
Now, Tim, because of the context of what you said, I need to ask it in this manner. You're a white guy. Please tell me.
I am indeed.
Please tell me, because it is this is important, and this is what I try to get across. These are things that you can do that I can't.
Yeah.
What was your switch, or was there a switch that allowed you to see through take the colored glasses off and actually see that there was really a disparity, that there was a difference in the way people's framing occurred?
Sure. Well, a lot of credit for that goes to my upbringing. I think I was very lucky, very fortunate, frankly, to be raised in the South. And that may seem like a very strange thing for,
Not really.
I think it might not sound strange to you, but I think to
Right.
a lot of white folks, in particular white liberals,
Right.
would be stunned by my saying that, because a lot of white liberals who live in Northeastern or West Coast or other places who look at the South, as just this sort of backward swamp of folks, what they sometimes miss is that for those of us who were white and grew up in the South and nonetheless ended up progressive, which is not a given by any stretch, but if you are white and you grew up in the South and you ended up on the left, one thing that I know is that your progressivism came through the crucible of race. It had to, because race is the background noise of everything that happens here. You cannot grow up in Nashville, where I grew up, one of the main locations of the civil rights struggle historically, and not understand the centrality of racism. Whereas I think you could grow up in Portland, Oregon, even though racism is the background noise of everything there too, as black folks in Portland will readily tell you. But you could be white in Portland, or white in Seattle, or white in LA or the Bay Area, and perhaps maybe come to your progressivism through different issues and different lenses. You can't do that in the South. You may come up in the South and still have great climate awareness and economic awareness, environmental issues, militarism, but race is going to be there. So growing up in the South, I was able to not only see the disparity, but also to have a context historically and a narrative to explain it. And I had parents that were very clear about that. I went to a historically black preschool. Most of my early childhood friends were black kids. I know every white person says we have black friends and we're usually lying. That's like all I had for the first several years of school, because that's who I was around. And so I was able to see when they were treated differently. I didn't always know what was happening. I was 5, 6, 7 years old. I didn't have the language, but I could see with my own eyes and feel with my own heart what was being done. Something was dividing us, something was keeping us apart, and that they were being treated differentially. And I think that lens was very helpful as I went through life and, ultimately became an adult, went to college in New Orleans, where I was able to see very, very clearly the disparity between what it meant to be white uptown at Tulane versus what it meant to be black in that city. Even though it's a black city, culturally and demographically, it was a very divided one. And it was easier for me to see that, I think, because of my upbringing.
Well, one of the things that I admire with you is you have the cojones to actually talk to white liberals in general, and just stating the fact that you're born in the South. The things in the South aren't a hell of a lot different specifically than the North. I mean, the Boston occurred in Boston. I mean, the killings in Minnesota occurred in progressive Minneapolis, and we can talk about all the laws in Oregon that you had to be out of certain places at dark.
Right.
So there are not a lot of people that have the honesty. By the way, I do a whole lot of activism, and it's amazing that most of all the progressive activists kind of look like you when we go to our conferences, you know, and when I do go to a few right-wing things, they are so much trying not to be seen as racist that they tend to overbear on when guys like me show up.
Yeah. I believe it. Yeah, I think that there's a lot of things going on that I think we have to be aware of. I mean, number one, it's that geographic piece, that this conceit that racism is this location, you know, that it's over here but not over there, is a conceit that we just can't afford. The whole nation was constructed on the scaffolding of white supremacy. Now, it looks different in different parts of the country. It plays out differently in different parts of the country. So Oregon, as you referenced, they just wanted black folks out of the territory altogether, whereas in Alabama, they didn't. They wanted black folks to do all the hard work, but it's still white supremacy. The fact that you had more sundown towns in the state of Illinois than any other state in America, southern and middle Illinois in particular, central Illinois, where black folks had to be out by 5 o'clock. Whereas in the South, no, you wanted black folks around because they were going to be putting your child down at 7 o'clock and they were going to be cleaning the house at 8 o'clock. And they were, you know, so there was a difference, but it's all white supremacy. Dr. King said Chicago was the hardest place that he ever tried to organize, and they threw bottles and rocks at him in Cicero during a march there in, I believe, 1966. So number one, there's no geographic differentiation quantitatively, just maybe qualitatively in terms of how it looks. Secondly, there's also not this divide between the sort of good white liberal and the bad white reactionary. Yes, there are differences of degree. And on balance, I would rather hang out with and try to bring over white progressive folks to an anti-racist lens than white reactionaries, because I think it's easier and it's less of a distance to travel. But the white liberal and white progressive is so bought in to the idea of their own goodness that sometimes they're the hardest to reach. They can be very I mean, this woman in Central Park, from everything that I have heard about her, Amy Cooper, is a Democrat. She has given money to Democratic candidates. She was someone who supported Hillary Clinton. I mean, this is someone who, if you had told her 3 weeks earlier that she was going to do this, probably would have said, oh, no. But here's the thing. She, just like everybody else, regardless of politics, has been conditioned to not just fear black men, which I think is a misnomer. It's to have contempt for the lives and the rights of black people. And when the chips are down, you will play that card. That's the race card we never talk about. It's
Tim,
that.
You've got to repeat that, because that is something that a lot of people have not internalized yet. It's not that it's not even solely about racism. It's also about the contempt of that guy saying, you need to put the leash. Who the hell are you to tell me to put a leash on my dog? And then I'm going to use the enforcer because you had the nerve to tell me that. And we all know what the enforcers do, right?
Right. And she can sit and say that she didn't realize. I mean, I know her argument now is, I never thought about how it's different for police to come. But she did, because you said African-American male threatening my life, which was a lie and an unnecessary descriptor. Like, if you're just trying to describe the guy, you would need to say more than African-American male. You need to say African-American male, 5'9", wearing a checkered shirt and whatever, because you're actually trying to describe. If all you're doing is saying black male, what you're saying is, I don't care if y'all come and beat this one or whoever else you find in the park who you think might have been the guy I was talking to. And whether it was conscious, whether it was subconscious, it isn't just fear. I think the mistake has been, some of the coverage has been, well, it's this internalized subconscious implicit bias and fear. It's not fear. You don't respond when you're afraid. You don't get up in the face of the thing that you're afraid of. I'm afraid, if I was in the woods and a bear came upon me, I would not start pointing at the bear, yelling at the bear, screaming at the bear, running towards the bear. I would freeze, because that's what they tell you to do, I think. I don't know. I don't spend a lot of time in the woods. But I would either freeze, or I would run, or I would try to climb a tree or something. I certainly wouldn't agitate the bear. If I'm afraid of a dog that's off a leash in my neighborhood, I don't go up to the dog and scream at the dog. I freeze or I run away. So she wasn't afraid. She had this internalized contempt at the very least, indifference. I'll say that. At the very least, a disregard for the well-being of Black life, and at the very most, contempt for Black life. And that's in spite of her politics. So this is why I say this isn't a right and left issue. This certainly is not a Democrat and Republican issue. This is an issue about how white supremacy has affected everyone. Am I saying that she's the equivalent of a racist cop who, no, I'm not. But I'm saying that she's affected by the same poison that racist cop is affected by, that George Zimmerman was affected by, that the guys that killed Ahmaud Arbery were affected by. And so we all have to take some accountability and responsibility for that.
I think I won over one of my right-wing listeners because he was shocked when he pointed out that progressives are racist too, and he expected me to say, oh no, we are the value of the world or whatever. And I said, absolutely, you are right. And it took him for a curve. I actually agreed with him.
Right. Well, they all assume that the world is Republicans and Democrats,
right,
and conservatives, and that's why they always want to talk about the Democratic Party being the party of slaveholders. Yeah, I know. We all know. No kidding. That's not shocking. What is interesting is that the Republican and conservative folks are the ones who want to fly that flag now. Exactly. those of us on the left and those of us who vote Democrat most of the time, whether we call ourselves that or not, we gave that up a long time ago. We're actually really glad that our side, quote unquote, lost. But of course, that was never the progressive side. By definition, conservatism and reactionary politics is about maintaining existing hierarchies of power. That's what the Confederacy was about. They were Democrats, but they were the ones who were trying to conserve the existing power structure. So no progressive was ever in favor of that. Lincoln himself, who of course was not that progressive racially, but Lincoln did say that labor was prior to capital, that labor created all the wealth that capital has. We think that's Karl Marx that said that, and he did. So did Abraham Lincoln. So the fact that the Republicans were the party of abolition then and the Democrats were the party of slavery means very little. The Dodgers used to be in Brooklyn too, and things change. And
we also must remember that in and above everything else, Abraham Lincoln said the reason that he signed the Emancipation Proclamation was to maintain the Union. So
that's it. Right.
It wasn't out of some sort of a moral reason. It was to maintain the Union. But getting back to Minneapolis, what are your thoughts? I want to see if it's Congress to mine. What are your thoughts on how Mayor Jacob Frey's been handling the situation?
Well, I thought, his very initial statement about how if this were anyone else, we would be arrested was a very important statement to make because it is critical that political leaders at a time like this, white political leaders in particular, make that kind of statement. The mayor there has been very strong, and he's been criticized for it by the police, particularly by the police union in Minneapolis, who I should point out it's a union that is headed by a guy who is a militant Trump supporter and connected to a cop biker gang that several years ago, several of that gang of that biker club's members were found with white power patches on their own website. So this is a cop union, like a lot of police unions, that I think really functions as a protection racket, not a union. But in any event, the mayor there has said, he doesn't want the police in Minneapolis attending these warrior trainings because really it teaches the cops that they're basically soldiers and that the people that they police are essentially the enemy, which is a horrible mentality. If you go into a neighborhood with a wartime footing, you're going to treat people like the enemy. That's why they want to have the tanks and the military. Why do cops have camo? Like that, that question, why are cops going into urban environments with camouflage intended for either the jungle or the desert? That doesn't make any sense unless you're going in as a soldier who wants to pretend that you're in Afghanistan or wants to pretend that you're in Iraq or wants to pretend that you're back in Vietnam. The mayor there has been very strong about criticizing and condemning that, and I hope he will continue to do so. The problem in that town is the DA. The problem is a district attorney who apparently wants us to believe that he doesn't have enough evidence to even make an arrest. Now, I understand when it comes to conviction, there's a standard of evidence and there's a process that we have to let play out. And these officers are certainly deserving of a fair trial. And we have to see how that works. But the idea that you don't have enough evidence for an arrest If any of us did that on camera or not, and there were witnesses, we would be arrested. Whether we would be convicted is a whole different issue. But to say that you don't even have enough for a criminal charge flies in the face of every bit of logic that anyone in law enforcement would ever try to bring to bear in a situation like this. It makes no sense at all. And it raises the question, what kind of pressure is he feeling from the Department of Justice? What kind of pressure is he feeling from folks within the police union? I don't know for sure, but I do know this is why we need special prosecutors in cases like this, because when you have a DA's office that works hand in glove with law enforcement, as it must. I understand that. I watch Law and Order. I know that thing at the beginning where they say the cops and the DAs prosecute. I get it. But that's why when the cops are implicated in wrongdoing, you have to have independent prosecutors, independent folks looking at that and making the decision.
You know, and I think I think the other thing the mayor is going to have to be concerned of is, with all the destruction that you've had in the city right now, whoever runs against him is going to try to somehow turn that into he didn't have control of the city. I mean, a lot of people I've heard, been complaining so much about all this rioting and destruction. Nobody really wants to see people's businesses destroyed. But I mean, if I'm not mistaken, the foundation of the United States of America sort of started with something like that, didn't it?
Well, there were no sit-ins at King George's palace.
Right.
There were no, nighttime horseback freedom rides. There was no nonviolent resistance to the Brits. There was nothing but guns and a lot of blood. I mean, we're talking about a country founded in violence. Now, we can have a discussion about the tactical and strategic value of property destruction. We can have that discussion, just as they had to have that discussion in South Africa. And Nelson Mandela was part of that conversation and believed in sabotaging commercial property and state property, did not want to attack human life, but did talk about property violence. We can have that discussion, but you know who isn't part of that discussion is anyone who has not already committed to the struggle for racial justice and equity. If you're in that struggle, then you're welcome to be part of that conversation. But if you're someone who didn't say anything when George Floyd was killed, who didn't tweet anything out, if you're Tommy Lauren, Aryan Rage Barbie on Twitter, talking about how terrible it is that Black folks are burning stuff in Minneapolis, but when George Floyd was killed, you didn't say anything, you are not invited to the conversation. You're not part of the conversation. You're a vulture on the conversation. So if you want to, all of us who are part of this movement, we have this debate amongst ourselves all the time. What is the proper tactic? What is the proper strategy? What is the proper mix of protest, including potentially, the threat of violent protest? What is the proper mix of electoral politics? What is the proper mix of all of those things? But if you're not part of the movement, why are you talking? If you're not committed to racial justice, why are you talking?
Absolutely. So I mean, another quick subject. This is sort of an aside. A CNN reporter got arrested yesterday. His name was what is his name? Omar Jimenez.
Yeah.
Black Latino. I'm a Black Latino. He's a Black Latino. Okay. There was another guy, Josh Campbell. Guess what? He's also with CNN. Guess what? Who just looks like? Hey,
well,
Tim, he looks like you, brother.
His name is Josh Campbell. He's white.
Yeah, he looks like you, brother.
I just don't know too many guys named Josh Campbell. Right.
So, and then he said, they were nice with him. They said, go here, go there. Right. We're here. The purpose of the riots were to protest against killing, assassinating, murdering a Black guy. And the cops that are coming to create peace, what did they do? Tell me the mentality that goes with that, Tim.
Well, I think part of it is that they are on this wartime footing. They have been led to believe by some of their own higher ups, not the chief there, who I think is trying to, sort of control. The chief is a man of color who is trying, to fight against that. And he's actually been involved in lawsuits against brutal cops.
Yeah, he was.
So, it's not him, but again, the police union, which think about Derek Chauvin, the main guy who had his knee in the neck of George Floyd. This is a guy with 18 complaints. He's been involved in 3 shootings. Now, most cops will go their entire career, never, ever have to fire their gun. Yes. Never. He's been involved in 3 shootings. The mathematical odds of that happening by coincidence are just about non-existent. So then you have to start to ask yourself, why would he and his colleagues there think that they could get away with this, even with the video rolling? Well, because in the past, apparently, they have gotten away with things either similar or perhaps not quite that egregious, but still quite questionable.
Actually, Tim, probably quite that outrageous. We just didn't have it on tape.
Of course, right. Some of them probably were that egregious. But when you've got 18 complaints and you've only had 2 reprimands, nothing more serious than that in your file, no actual real punishment, you have every reason to think that you'll get away with it. So I think partly it's that. There's a wartime mentality. They view the community as the enemy. They protect their own at all costs. These are the guys that will say things like, well, you know, my only job is to get home to my family at night. No, that's not actually your job. When you interviewed to be a cop and they said, here's the job description, it did not say anything about you will be paid X amount per week so that you can get back to your family. No, your job is to uphold the law and to do so without violating the Constitution. And if you can't do that, you need to find a different job or a different hobby or take up woodworking or do something else because you're clearly not cut out for that job. And so I think that's part of it. The second thing, as far as the differential treatment of the CNN reporters, you know, there were stories out of Ferguson back in 2014, not even regarding the way media was treated, the way protesters were treated. There was a white guy who wrote a piece, it was circulated pretty heavily at the time, about how he and a buddy, so it was a white guy and a black guy, they're friends, they were both at the demonstrations in Ferguson. And the black guy was assaulted, brutalized by police, and the white guy was just told to move along. So this isn't even just the way they treat, you know, journalists. It's the way that they view the people who are out there protesting in the first place, really as the enemies. When you have the head of the cop union there who's called Black Lives Matter a terrorist organization, you're setting a tone for your police that leads them to believe that this is no different than fighting ISIS or, you know, fighting Al-Qaeda, basically.
You know, it's interesting because, people kind of get upset when I say this because, you know, you have black cops as well, you have Latino cops, you have Asian cops, you have all of that. And I said, whenever they get into the institution too many times, what they are blue. They've lost their whatever sense that they have. And it's interesting because when they appear in the justice system, however, that isn't true. You know that when Philando Castile got shot, it was in that area as well. Yeah. That particular cop got off. Yeah. But when Mohammed Noor shot Justine, I think her name was Ruzik or something like that. The people were outraged. Yeah. Because this was a blonde white woman shot by a black cop, and he had to go, and he learned that. Oh yeah,
and they even turned it into a cultural thing because he's Muslim. And so it was one of those things where they could say, oh, was he offended that she, you know, I remember people saying things about how he was offended by how she was dressed and how maybe he was culturally, religiously offended. It's insanity, the kind of stuff that was said about him, which you would never say about a white officer and isn't said about white officers when those things are done to people of color. But, you know, the point you raise about cops of color is very important. This is not about, and this goes back to the white liberal versus white conservative piece. It's not even about sort of, you know, black versus white versus brown. When you're part of a policing culture, when you're part of a law enforcement culture that encourages you to think of your partner and the other people in that particular precinct as your only line of defense against animals and against criminals and against terrorists, there does come a point where you would have to be incredibly strong emotionally, more so than most of us probably are, to be able to resist that, because you break down the defenses of otherwise good people. I think a lot of people get into policing for the right reasons. I think a lot of people go into law enforcement to do right by the community. Here's the problem. When you see wrong being done by the community and you then try to report it, you get in trouble within the community of officers. We saw this in Baltimore. After Freddie Gray died, there were 2 different cops, both white guys, who were former Baltimore PD. And they have both now gone public, they did back at that time, talking about how when they were on the force, they were horribly disturbed by some of the brutality they saw, the corruption they saw within the police department, planting drugs on black folks, beating up black folks who were suspected of crime brutally, and then expecting everyone to cover it up. And this one particular cop talked about how when he tried to turn in the officer who did that, the whole department turned on him. They put a rat on his desk or in his car to signify, a dead rat, to signify that he was a rat. The chief of police, or somebody who was maybe a sergeant or somebody above him, said, your career's over, you might as well retire. Both of these guys were pushed out of policing. So it isn't about every cop being a horrible person. Again, I think most people are decent people. But if you're a decent person and you're caught up in an indecent culture, in a culture that is about oppression, it can't be very surprising when over time you become part of that. And if you try to rebel against it, you get checked and you get put back in your place and you get punished. And so I think we have to change the culture of law enforcement. It's not just about getting more black cops and more brown cops. It's about changing the mentality of law enforcement that currently pervades most communities in this country.
Couldn't have said it any better. So Tim, where do we go from here, Minneapolis and beyond?
Well, I think we've got to start talking about and take advantage of this horrible opportunity that we've been afforded by, frankly, by the coronavirus pandemic. Because, and what I mean by that is this, what the pandemic is showing us, I think, for some of us, obviously some people not getting the memo, they're the ones out at the state capitol ready to open everything back up and roll the dice with other people's lives, interestingly. But I think a lot of white Americans right now are sitting around, maybe for the first time, asking questions that black and brown folks ask all the time. Questions like, is it safe to go to the store? Is it safe to go shopping? Is it safe to run around, take a jog around the neighborhood? These are questions that black folks have been asking for a real long time, because John Crawford needed to know desperately before he went into that Walmart in Ohio several years back, is it safe? As it turns out, it wasn't. Tamir Rice needed to know, is it safe to go to that park and play with a toy gun? Something that white kids do every day in this country without fear of being shot by cops. And so if people of color have always asked those questions and now white folks are having to ask them, maybe we can take that opportunity to say, hey, you know that fear that you're feeling right now? Totally justifiable, totally understandable. And you know what? It's the thing that they've been telling you, that they've been telling us for decades, for centuries. So maybe now we can create some empathy. Maybe we can create an empathic connection between the experiences of people of color who are always wondering whether it's safe for them, who are always wondering, am I going to have a job in 3 months? Who are always wondering, am I going to have affordable health care? Who are always wondering, if I get sick, will I be able to get treatment and will I be able to afford it? None of those things are new for people of color, but for an awful lot of white folks, they are. So what can we learn from this moment? If we take the opportunity that's been handed us to create empathy and to create connection, and then to build movements around that, then I think we can come out of this moment, both the horror of what's happened in Minneapolis, but the national and even global horror of COVID-19 with a very different sensibility.
Tim Wise, anti-racist crusader and writer. Thank you so kindly for being a part of Politics Done Right.
Thank you for having me.
Welcome to Politics Done Right. I am your host, Egberto Willies. This is a progressive program that will take the mystery out of politics. This is the program that will encourage you to make sure government becomes we the people. Whether you are liberal, progressive, conservative, or otherwise, you get to air your point of view. We are an independent media outlet that, unlike mainstream media beholden to corporations, we only owe allegiance to you. Remember, you can also send me a tweet at EGBERTOWILLIES. That is at Egberto Willies. Let us engage. It is Politics Done Right.